Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Rachel's studio, where I share my wins, fails, breakthroughs, and insights in the hope that it will inspire you to keep creating. I feel like every week of painting has a theme, and the past week or two of painting has been about the power of the cauliflower. So, in today's video, we're going to learn 10 tips how to make cauliflowers work for you. Some of the paintings in this video are just studies, and they are the paintings that I've worked on in the last 1 or 2 weeks. But I do include them because although they might not be perfect, I achieved exactly what I wanted when it came to their cauliflowers. And remember, I added chapters so you can skip around to whatever interests you. First of all, let's look at what a cauliflower is. Basically, a cauliflower is often thought of as a mistake, and it's when you're painting and you're in the buckling stage. If you haven't watched my video about the different stages of paper moisture combined with different amounts of moisture or water in your brush, be sure to check out the video that I'll link here. But a cauliflower is when your paper is buckling, kind of like it's half dry, and you go in with too drippy a paint, and that wet paint or clear water creates a cauliflower or a blossom. Some people call it a blossom, some people call it a cauliflower, but for obvious reasons, it's called a cauliflower because it kind of looks like cauliflowering. It makes a really strong texture. And that texture or that tendency of watercolor can really be harnessed and used to make really amazing techniques that will take your paintings to the next level. So let's get started with my 10 tips on how to use cauliflowers in your painting. Tip number 1, choose a subject amenable to cauliflowering. Every painting in this video was chosen because of the picture's potential for cauliflower type action. There are a lot of different types of cauliflowers, but the panda, for example, has long edges of cauliflowers along his jaw and also in the pom-pom on his hat. For the Christmas cat, I used cauliflowers for a snow effect. And then the dapples in the horse's coat were created with cauliflowers and salt. And of course, there's Sadie Scary, which is also available as a free video here on YouTube, and a full real-time in-depth tutorial on my Patreon that I think is about 2 hours long, where I explain in very in-depth detail how I painted Sadie Scary. But I'll link the free version here, and if you're interested in joining one of my paid student subscriptions, either on Patreon or here on YouTube, you are welcome to do that, and I'd love to have you. And I am running a special in the month of October, where if you join for a year, you get 2 months free. So anyway, just know that when you click on these videos that I link in this video, it won't take you out of the video, it'll just queue it up for you to watch later. For the Sadie Scary video, I used cauliflowers to create moon textures and a star-filled sky. Tip number 2, use the right paint. Different paints cauliflower in different ways. Some paints barely cauliflower at all, for example, ultramarine blue. In my experience, it is hard to get ultramarine blue to get it to cauliflower. It will, but you have to get everything just right. You can look up how much paints cauliflower by going to handprint.com and going to his section on paint. There, he calls it blossom, not cauliflowering. So he judges hundreds and hundreds of paint for how much they cauliflower and a lot of other qualities of paint too. There are other paints that cauliflower in a very unique pattern too, namely Daniel Smith Lamp Black. To see my most spectacular results with this paint, be sure to check out my video about the chick painting I did, and I'll link it here. Daniel Smith Lamp Black furs out unlike any other paint I've used when you paint wet and wet with it. I painted the panda with this paint, and in fact chose to paint this panda specifically to play with this property of Daniel Smith Lamp Black when it cauliflowers and when it's used in a wet and wet technique. Now, I love pandas, but sorry, it was all about the cauliflower when I chose this muse. Finally, I've recently been playing with a new mix for black, and one of the reasons I love it so much is its tendency to cauliflower. I learned about this mix again on handprint.com. He calls it his synthetic black mix and includes Daniel Smith Permanent Brown, Daniel Smith Indian Throne Blue, and Phthalo Green. These paints seem to cauliflower really well, so I chose them to paint both the Dappled Horse and Sadie's Moon. Indigo blue, which is just a convenience mix of lamp black and phthalo blue, also makes beautiful cauliflowers, but there's lots of paints that you can explore that will cauliflower beautifully. You just have to try out your paint colors that you have and see which ones cauliflower the best. Tip number 3, use the right paper. Any good watercolor paper will do as long as it's 100% cotton. Actually, let me say this though, I've had decent cauliflower results on cheaper cellulose paper, and that is fluid cold pressed paper, and it's actually made of cellulose and it's a cheaper alternative. All the paintings in this video were done on Arches cold press 140 pound. It gives me the most dependable results, although sizing has been an issue lately. Other papers that are fun to play with cauliflower effects include hot press and Yupo paper, which is kind of like a synthetic plastic paper. But just know you need to use watercolor paper to get these results. If you use just cheap, any kind of paper, you will not be able to get cauliflower effects. Tip number 4, and this is an important one, timing is everything. A big determinator of your success with cauliflowers, is determinator even a word, by the way? But anyway, timing is so important. If you splash water or drip water on your painting when it's not the right moisture level, it will not cauliflower well. But basically you want to wait until your paper enters the buckling stage. Buckling stage is when your paper is starting to absorb the water because it has been wet for a while, and the absorbed water makes the paper start to get little hills and valleys, aka buckles. So sometimes you literally have to sit and watch paint dry before you begin using your cauliflower techniques. Also, you will get more structured, hard-edged cauliflowers at the drier end of paper moisture levels, and softer cauliflowers when you drip or paint onto wetter paper. A lot of times I'll do a little test and put one little drip to see how it looks. If you end up trying your cauliflower and not much happens, just wait another 5 or so minutes and then try again. All right, tip number 5 is use water splats. There's a lot of different ways you can apply water to create cauliflowers. And one of my favorite ways is to splat water forcefully onto my painting. What I do is I dip the tips of my fingers in clear water, let the excess drops fall off, then forcefully flick them with 1 or 2 flicks, strong splats, onto the buckling paper. This is how I did a lot of the dapples on the horse, as well as the atmospheric effects in the sky for Sadie Scary. All right, tip number 6 is use bigger drops of water for larger areas. Another way to make 1 or 2 large cauliflowers, such as for the pom-pom on the panda's hat, you paint the whole area with clear water, then paint around the area you want a big cauliflower in with cream consistency paint, and then as it dries, drop a little water in the middle of the pom-pom. Keep babysitting it as it dries to add little bits of water, or you can also sop up some paint, then redrop a little water in the area as needed. So for example, for this panda, I painted the whole area with clear water, waited a little bit, and then used my Daniel Smith lamp black and painted around the pom-pom. And then as the whole area dried, I dripped clear water inside the pom-pom so that clear water would push out into the Daniel Smith lamp black and make really interesting furred out textures that only Daniel Smith does. And you can also learn more about what I call my push technique. The push technique is basically using the power of the cauliflower to create really interesting textures. And I did a whole video on my push technique and I'll link that here. All right, tip number 7, and I'm including this because it gives a cauliflower type effect, and that is using salt. And using salt is very similar as creating cauliflowers because you also have to rely on timing. You have to put the salt on your painting at just the right time. If you drop salt on glistening paper, it won't have as much, if any, of an effect than if you drop the salt when it's the buckling stage. You can use kosher salt for bigger effects, and there are also colored salts that you can play with that will add pigment to the effect. Also with salt, remember, don't use too much. Just like when you're using the splat technique, you don't want to splat too much water. When you're adding salt to your buckling paper, you don't want to use too much salt. Just a few grains will give you a beautiful effect. So like I just said for tip number 8, I'm going to repeat that in tip number 8 and say don't overdo it. If you do too many cauliflowers, too many splats, too much water, they might not cauliflower as effectively. So remember, just a few splats, just a few sprinkles of salt, and you are good. Tip number 9, and this is another important one, cauliflowers work best in the first wash. So my experience has taught me that cauliflowers work best in the first wash, and if you paint a layer, let it dry, then paint another layer on that and try to create cauliflowers in that second layer or second glaze, the effect will be a lot more muted if it even happens at all. So remember, if you want to use cauliflowers in your work, get your values as close to the darkness you want on that first wash that you plan on putting cauliflowers in, because you're not going to be able to redo it. Now, a lot of times what I'll do is I'll get really strong cauliflower effects and I actually want to tone them down. So that is one thing that I do is I'll create a cauliflower effect, let that layer completely dry or set, and then go over it with a tea consistency wash of paint to kind of tone it down if the dapples or the bright spots get too bright. Like for the horse, I will paint over some of these dapples to push the hind end of the horse back into the painting, which I haven't done that yet, but that will be coming soon. And just by the way, the dapple horse in particular is going to be a full Patreon tutorial. In fact, I already have a few sessions up. It's over 2 hours of tutorial on how I painted this dapple horse. And you can see that on my Patreon, and it will also be available when it's done to my YouTube students and on my website as an individual tutorial you can buy if you don't want to subscribe into all my lessons. All right, tip number 10, I think this is my best one, and it's all about cauliflowers on steroids. So I did this technique on my horse in the dapples because I really wanted the dapples to be accentuated. This would also work, say, if you're painting starry skies or snow. This would be a really cool technique. And what you do is you say you have a cauliflower forming and it's kind of a delicate cauliflower and you want it to have higher contrast. You want the cauliflower to be whiter and the area around it darker. So what you do is you drop a little water and then you go in with a wrung out brush and then you soak up some water, and by default, you'll also soak up any excess paint in that lighter area. And then immediately after you've soaked up all the excess water, you go in and drop a little bit more water right into the middle of the cauliflower to accentuate that cauliflower. All right, thank you so much for joining me for this 10 tips on how to create cauliflowers. Be sure to subscribe, like this video, and leaving me a comment really helps out this channel because it helps tell the algorithm that I'm interesting. So show the algorithm I'm interesting by coming to leave me a comment and chatting me up in the comments, which I love to do anyway. And that will help this channel grow so I can continue to bring you more and more free content and also expand my paid Patreon and student services as well. So thank you so much for all your support, and I'll see you in the next tutorial. Bye, everybody.